I probably should have brought a book up for this, since I am going to talk about a guy who fights with books. Oh well. I guess I am technically representing Bookwise in the fact that I have a, Harry Potter Hufflepuff shirt, because, well, I tend to get either Hufflepuff or Ravenclaw, but okay. I have a new mic now. I'm still getting used to it. Hopefully the audio is good on this. I'll find out later when I edit it. If not, I guess I may have to re-record the whole thing, but I hope not. Okay. Time to talk about Charlotte Mont. So again, just one of the Charlotte siblings that I really like, that I just kind of wanted to talk about, that have like interesting powers, or I just like them in general. Mont is kind of a mix between, he has interesting powers. I like his devil fruit, his Buku Buku no Mi. And, he's got an interesting design, and, he likes cheese. He seems to be very smart. So, we'll see. He's good at tactics and strategy and things like that. So, we'll kind of see how this goes. But Charlotte Mont, or Scribe Charlotte Mont, Scribe is like his epitaph that he gets. He's one of the few siblings to actually have it. There's, Demon Lady Amande, and then there's him. I don't even think the generals have epitaphs, or the 3 sweet commanders have epitaphs as far as we're aware. I was like looking that up, and I'm like, no, none of them really have any like, nickname or something like that from the Marines. It's just these 2 as far as I can tell. Which I just find kind of interesting. I admittedly, Oda may not have wanted to go through and think of, 85 or whatever different, epitaphs for all the different kids, which is fair, but you'd think at least the sweet commanders would have, something along those lines, but they don't. Oh well. So Mont is the 19th son and the 30th child of the Charlotte family. He is an officer of the Big Mom Pirates, obviously, as are pretty much all of the siblings that are like Flampe and older. I'll hold that rank of like an officer somewhere in the Pirates. He is also Totland's Minister of Cheese, governing over Cheese Island. Yay, cheese. I know that there's also this adorable, it's one of the cover pages that Oda drew, that it's not a series or anything like that. It's just Mont eating cheese with a bunch of mice, and they all have wine, and there's books everywhere, and I'm just like, yeah, that sounds fun. So there's that, so that's kind of nice. He is 38 years old, which means that he was born just after everything happened with God Valley. Or so. And, I know that there's some people that think that, maybe he's the son of one of the Rocks pirates. I know that some people think that maybe he's Shiki's son because they have, like, similar noses. And I'm like, I could see it. I know that there are theories that, like, some of the older children in the Rocks pirates are children of, sons or daughters of some of the other members of the Rocks pirates and such like that. Which is fair. I mean, given Big Mom's proclivity for, finding husbands, that's a possibility. But we don't know. So we have for Mont, his devil fruit power, as I mentioned, is the Buku Buku no Mi, or the book fruit. I really like this devil fruit just in general, because I love the fact that it's like, he can control books, so he can, have these books that he, like, flies around on, because that's, like, how he kind of gets around in battle. He's like, well, I physically cannot fly, but if I stand on these books, they can fly, they can levitate, and I can fly. And I'm like, well thought out, man, well thought out. Which is this other trend when it comes to a bunch of the different Charlotte children, where they have these devil fruits, and you might look at that and go, like, well, what's so threatening about crackers? Or what's so threatening about books? necessarily right off the bat. And then you see what they're capable of doing with it because they've had so much time and a need to in regards to, training with their devil fruits. And that's a very good way of showing that. In that regard. And we just see like this breadth of abilities of what Mont is able to do with this devil fruit specifically. And I love that. I love it when Oda is like, oh, you think this devil fruit isn't going to be all that threatening? Ha 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 ha. I've proven you wrong. Have a prison book. So we see him demonstrate various things, and I'll go over a little bit more when we get to them in the story, when I go through his history. So obviously one of the first things we see him do when he is dealing with Luffy, when him and a bunch of the siblings have come out and they're, dealing with Luffy and Nami while they're, waiting for Sanji after they've dealt with the seducing woods. And one of the things that ends up happening is he seems to supposedly trap Luffy's mind in a book, where Luffy basically is just like tripping in regards to the fact, is like tripping on something, and the fact that he is, he's seeing something around him that is not actually there. He is seeing this illusionary world of these books that Mont has created. And I think they hype it up a little bit extra in the anime, which is fine. But it results in Luffy is not quite aware of what's going on around him, and that clearly has the ability to mess with his observation haki. Because while he can tell that there's a threat here, he can't quite tell where it's coming from or what the threat is actually going to do. And that like messes with his sense of, his observation haki. So we get that. We also find out that according to Jinbei, Montdoor's powers are really only limited by his imagination, which is pretty cool in general. And that's kind of like something that is like very similar to Bonnie's devil fruit, and the fact that, her imagination to be able to to kind of come up with this concept of like Nika and everything like that is able to, affect how she physically can fight. And with Mont it's, oh, hey, I can imagine this world that you're trapped in, and you're going to be trapped in this world for a little while, at least mentally. And in the real world, your body's going to take a bunch of punishment since it can't quite tell what's going on. And that's when, all of his siblings a bunch of the siblings are attacking Luffy and everything. And they wear Luffy down. And then we cut to the fact that he also has the ability to trap them inside of the prison books. And we see that with the fact that there's all of these prison books in the prison book library, where, it's not just Nami and Luffy trapped in this thing. There's all of these other books that have, because Linlin shows off, the one with all the animals pinned in it, to the Germa family, to, the Vinsmokes and everything like that. And I think even Judge is a little bit like, that's a bit much, woman, which is kind of funny coming from Judge, and everything he's done. So, we get those, and I'll talk about those a little bit when we get to them in the story, but, so those are kind of, the basics of what his powers can do. I don't really know if there would be much that, Haki would be able to do to enhance those abilities, but it may also just be, I don't know, I cover this book in Haki and I hit you with it, or I throw it at you. I don't know. It does kind of go off on the line of, you want weapons, we're in a library. Books are the greatest weapons in the world, to paraphrase the Doctor from Doctor Who. And in Montdoor's case, it's like, yeah, these are great weapons. Here, have a book. Bang! Ow! Type of thing. So, going into Montdoor's history, so as I stated, he was born 30 years ago, and either, if I'm remembering correctly, I think he was probably born a little bit just before or just after everything happens with the rocks incident, since we don't have enough exact time frame of when that happens. But even if he was born just before everything happened with the rocks incident, he probably wouldn't really have any memory of the rocks pirates, because he would have been a baby. So he wouldn't have had any memory of that. And he would have probably been, one of the ones that's raised, just like the other older siblings, all raised, primarily on Whole Cake Island and such, where Big Mom probably went back and started to set herself up as queen there. And maybe take slightly better care of her children. That's left up for debate. But we really don't get too much else in there. Sometime within this time frame, he, gets his devil fruit and, starts to use his abilities to build up the prisoner library that Big Mom has. Not really too much else. The next big thing that we know is that, like, during the time skip, there was, like, a manticore that escaped Impel Down, and they managed to capture it and pin it in a book with his powers. And given how extensive the prison library is that Big Mom seems to have, Mont is quite capable of, he's done that for a long time, but he also seems to have, like, the ability to produce an unlimited number of these prison books, which I would have the question of, okay, is there an upper limit to how many of these things he can create, or is it they make these giant books and then he can, touch them and shift them around and make them, have his powers in them to then result in being able to, turn them into a prison book and pin the people inside of it and everything like that. Possibly we don't get a full explanation of that. Let's see. Next up, we don't really get, too much else with him until we actually get into the Whole Cake Island arc. So, at the beginning of the Whole Cake Island arc, we have it where Lin is, of course, going on one of her hunger-paying rampages where she wants her croquembouche. And Mont, along with Galette and Moscato and several others, are all running around trying to, stop Mama from, hurting the civilians and everything like that. And as I've stated before, the Charlotte siblings actually seem to care, to a degree, about the citizens of, Whole Cake Island and of their own islands and such like that. Even, and they care about them to a degree because, it's their jobs to keep an eye on all of them, but it's also kind of, they kind of need the citizens to keep, Totland kind of up and going for, like, the leave or life tax and everything like that. But, so there's a little bit there. And, so Montdour's running around trying to, deal with stuff there. And then he witnesses what happens with Charlotte Moscato, and where their mother, where Lin rips out, 40 years of his life from Moscato. And then after they've gotten Big Mom calmed down because Jinbei showed up and saved the day, Montdour grabs one of the different, soul guard things and, tells him gather up all of the different pieces of, Montdour's soul that are scattered here and put them back into his body. And the thing seems to listen to him. We also just see how worried Montdour, along with, Galette and such, were when it comes to seeing that, oh, it's raining outside. If you can hear that, it's raining outside. How worried they were at Moscato being hurt. And as I said, the siblings, to a degree, are very close to each other. We also see, and throughout this, and I'll mention this a lot in Galette's video next, but Montdour and Galette seem to be around each other a lot when it comes to dealing with a bunch of this stuff. Now, admittedly, they're not that far apart in age. Or Smoothie next. One of the two. Smoothie or Galette is next. I don't remember, but when I get to Galette, I'll mention Montdour a lot because they're together a lot. When it comes to dealing with different interactions with characters. So we see that. And, there's some other stuff. He witnesses Jinbei helping Big Mom to, get rid of the hunger cravings by giving her the croquembouche. He also seems to, you see him like interact with like little kids when they ask if Moscato is going to be okay. And, we don't see too much of him at that point. But the next time we see him is after Luffy and Nami have dealt with Cracker in the seducing woods, and Cracker has gone flying over Whole Cake Island and crashed into the side of the Whole Cake Chateau through, by crashing through Sweet City, and is just knocked out. And this is where we see Mont, Galette, and Opera show up, and they're just like, oh my god, Brother Cracker, what happened? Oh my god. And they're just like all very worried about Cracker and everything like that. And they're just like, oh my god, how could someone have defeated him? This is horrible. And I'm like, well, you're not wrong. But they're all very concerned about that. And Mont actually flies into a rage, trying to, wanting to find out who attacked Cracker and then wants to get revenge. So again, we see the siblings kind of all working together and caring about each other. Or at least most of them, Chiffon notwithstanding. And so we see some of that. And he's very worried about this. And a little bit after that is when him and Galette and Opera and several of the others all head off leading the little army over toward the Seducing Woods, or the border of the Seducing Woods, because they've heard that, that's where Luffy and Nami are after Luffy had his confrontation with Sanji. And they all head there, and what ends up happening is this is where, Galette is like dealing with Nami, and, Mont, Luffy starts putting up a fight. He's not at full health, obviously, because he hasn't eaten, technically, for a little while. Because he's on that hunger strike from not wanting to eat because Sanji's not making food. And what ends up happening is when, Big Mom's, little army shows up there led by Mont. Now, he does seem to be one of the strategists of the Big Mom pirates. I mean, there's other ones that are clearly good strategists, like Katakuri is pretty good at strategy. Same thing with, Perospero and such. They all seem to be pretty good at strategy. But Mont is, like, very much a, strategist in this regard. And they get to the area, and Luffy starts fighting with some of the other siblings. And what happens is, as a way of, fighting against Luffy, he ends up, sending over one of his books that it's labeled Suspense. And it, as I said, it, seems to trap Luffy's mind, because we cut back and forth between, the inside of the thing and what Luffy is seeing, which is just, all of this weird surrealism painting type stuff and getting attacked by stuff, while out in the real world, out in the physical world, he is being attacked by Opera's there fighting him. I think there's two of Opera's, quadruplet whatever brothers that are fighting against Luffy as well. There's also Juscapone and Muscapone that are there firing flaming arrows at Luffy and stuff like that. So Luffy's getting this double barrage, this mental barrage where he is mentally having to deal with all of this stuff, but he's not quite sure exactly what's going on because of him being inside of the book. And then out in the real world, out in the physical world, he's physically being attacked, but because it doesn't coincide with everything that's going on, he can't use his armament haki exactly and his observation haki correctly in order to be able to fight against it. Which leads to him eventually being knocked out. That's when we have it that, that's when Amande has, Amande and Galette have, the confrontation a little bit with, Nami, where they, figure out that she has Lola's favor card. And we see Mont actually being very worried about Lola in this regard, because they're he's like, oh my god, did you hurt Lola in order to steal that and everything? And Nami's like, no, we didn't hurt her. She gave it to us. And this just leads into where they are taken into the Whole Cake Chateau, and they are trapped inside of one of the prison books. Now, I don't know if this means that, Mont just, happened to pull out a book and trap Nami and Luffy in that, or if it was they were like escorted inside with Luffy still unconscious and Nami still trapped, and then pinned into the book. But one way or the other, they ended up pinned into the book in the prison library. And eventually Luffy wakes up and ends up seeing that they are stuck there in the prison books, like pinned to the book like bugs. And Luffy tries doing the thing where he tries to stretch his arms enough that he can try to get away, but that's not working because he is pinned in the book, and it doesn't seem like you can get out of the book unless you are physically let go from the book, or if you are, the book's set on fire, or there's water or something like that. Those are the only way you're going to get out of said book. So we have this whole interaction here where, like, Luffy is in prison in the book along with Nami, and then Mont is there where they're kind of talking on the Den Mushi to Lin, to Mama. And, he's, him and Galette and Opera are all there. Those three kind of seem to get paired together a bit for a while, too. I guess Oda maybe just like drawing them together as an interesting aesthetic, possibly. I don't know. And they're going through and, they're listening as, like, Nami and Luffy are arguing with Big Mom and everything. And then, after that happens, I know eventually, like, Perospero goes down and I think talks to them. And then I know that later on Pudding goes down and talks to them and everything like that. But Mont isn't really there for any of that. But we, eventually we get to the point where, they have, Mont and the others have to go off because they find out that, there's been, another group that broke into the room of treasure, and that's, Brook and Pedro and everything are interacting, or, fighting against Smoothie there. And they all head off to deal, to try to help with that. Later on, there is the meeting that happens with, several of the children and, other officers of the Big Mom Pirates that happen. And Mont basically seems to be the one that's leading this meeting because they're discussing the current state of what's going on with the Sanji retrieval team. And, he's, like, going through and, like, reporting on the fact that, okay, well, we've got Luffy and Nami captured. Sanji is still where he's supposed to be in the castle as far as they're aware. We still need to get Pedro and Brook. And then we also, I think at that point in time, Brook may have been caught, quote unquote, by Big Mom. Did that. And then I think they're trying to figure out about Carrot and Chopper at that point in time as well. Well, they're just discussing the status of, like, all these different members of the Sanji retrieval team. And what ends up happening is, of course, I believe this is after Nami and Luffy have escaped, because Jinbei shows up and, attacks Opera, and then lets Nami and Luffy out of the book by, like, setting it on fire and getting them out of the book that way. So Opera has decided to lie to the rest of the group, and he ends up saying that no, because he doesn't want it to look like he failed, he claims, no, I killed them instead. And it's just like, yeah, no, you didn't end him. But Dora's just, like, sitting there looking at Opera, and he's like, okay. And then, like, once everybody's left, he's like, I don't believe Opera, and starts coming up with, like, another plan to deal with that and everything like that. But he's like, I shouldn't have, he doesn't quite believe Opera, but he's like, Opera is just like vehemently denying that Luffy and Nami, saying that they burned alive and everything like that. And everything, and they're just like, fine, because they have to focus on other things. But Mont doesn't quite believe them. He says, he tells the chess pieces, keep looking for Nami and Luffy, which doesn't really do him much good, but, you get the idea. And we don't really get too much more from Mont until the next morning, the morning of the wedding, because what happens is that morning of the wedding, because they're concerned about Sanji, he goes to Sanji's room. Him and Galette are at Sanji's room again, and that's when Sanji has managed to sneak back in and, play off the fact that he's been there the whole night. So now he can get ready for the wedding. Like Montour's like, fine. He's just, wanting to make sure, that everything's going according to plan and everything like that everything's set up the way that it's supposed to and all of this other stuff. And, eventually it is time, he knows that Reiju is in the infirmary and everything like that. And, a bunch of other stuff happens that's not super involving him, but he is kind of there. As like to make sure that things are staying on track. And then we get to the actual wedding, to the tea party. So Montour is obviously at the tea party, and he watches as, putting Sanji right in on top of Zeus into the wedding and everything like that. And, as they're supposedly exchanging vows and everything like that, that's when him and his siblings are preparing to assassinate the Vinsmokes, and that's where they get, he watches as tries to kill Sanji, doesn't work, and then everything happens with that, and then, all of the Luffy duplicates emerge from the cake and just start causing chaos all over the place. And, as I mentioned with Perospero and such, Perospero has, trapped the Vinsmokes, the rest of the Vinsmokes in their candy-coated prisons at the table, and Montour is one of the ones that's at the table getting ready to shoot them. And that's, he also gets angry at Opera for the fact that, well, clearly you lied to me because, you said that you killed them in the prison library and they're right over there in regards to putting out all of the Luffys. So that's kind of funny. And all of that's happening. So what ends up happening from there is, Brook destroys the picture. Mama goes crazy. He witnesses trying to shoot Sanji and it doesn't work. Bunch of all that other stuff happens where Montour is just kind of watching as a bunch of this stuff happens. Doesn't really involve too much. But he's, watching a bunch of that. I think he tries to fight against Ichiji, but it doesn't go very well. When eventually the Vinsmokes get free and everything like that. So a bunch of that happens, and, so he's just like watching as a bunch of this happens. Eventually, Katakuri comes up with the mochi earplugs, so they're all able to, fight again and deal with stuff. And, again, he's watching as Beiji is the giant fortress, and as they're trying to deal with that, and eventually the Tamate Bako explodes, which causes, of course, the whole cake chateau to start falling. And, he ends up being okay because, people in One Piece are going to survive if they fall from hundreds of feet in the air and land on cake. Well, I mean, I actually don't know how good of an impact, thing cake would be if you try to land on it. I mean, if I tried to land on a piece of cake, that's not going to make any difference, except I'm going to be covered in cake. But I guess if it's this huge thing of cake that's like the whole cake chateau size, yes, if that is completely all cake, that's probably going to be a rather soft landing, depending on what type of a cake it is. With the cake and the frosting, that might be a rather soft landing. So that might be good in that regard, but there's not really too much else that I could say about that. But he survives that, and then everything happens where, they start having to deal with, they have to figure out how to prevent, Perospero from being killed because he lied to Mama about the cake. And all that, about those Straw Hats having a spare wedding cake. So, there's not too much that happens there. Mostly what ends up happening during the rest of this section of the arc is... Mont d'Or is still stationed on Whole Cake Island, and he has this giant book opened up he's sitting on a giant book that he opened up as a chair, and then he has this other book that he's using to keep track that must be like a physical thing of like a map of Totland that he has made that allows him to keep track of what's going on in Totland based on everything that's coming in through the Den Den Mushi. and he's like able to track where everybody is. Like, okay, so this is the last side of place of the Straw Hats. Pudding's over here working on the wedding cake. Pair of Sparrows with Mama, and they're over here. This is where these tart ships are. This is where this group is. This is where these are. And like he's kind of like watching all of this play out as like using his, using the book way of like setting up like a giant chessboard, so he has an idea of what's going on at all of these different places. And acting as like a relay information to keep track of everything. So he's acting like this information hub, which is pretty cool. It is giving him a good way of like showing what he can do with his devil fruit in regards to also just like planning strategy. I would also be kind of interested if he by some chance would be like, I guess maybe the Charlotte family historian to a degree. Like maybe at some point he decided that it was a good idea to start writing down the history of the Charlotte family. And this is just like headcanon type of a thing for me, because like I would be surprised if, and I've stated this before about Big Mom and such, it's like, I would be surprised if like the kids at least don't know who like Mother Caramel is, because they know how much the picture means to Big Mom. And well, like strangers, even if they are invited to the, Whole Cake Chateau for the tea party, they may not be given permission to know who Mother Caramel is. But I would think that maybe at least her children might be worthy of knowing that information. At least like the older kids are maybe told stories about, Mother Caramel and the sheep's house and everything like that. They're stuffed up there. Sorry. So that's a possibility, but, and like maybe he like went to Mama and asked, can you tell me about Mother Caramel? And maybe she's like, fine, and like tells him a bunch of stuff. And then like goes and talks to a bunch of the other older children about, setting up the Big Mom Pirates and, growing up and all of that stuff. And, the myth and the legend that is Katakuri and everything like that. And maybe he just like has like a whole like section in the library or something like that of just like, this is information about the Charlotte family and everything like that, and the history of the Charlotte family and Totland and everything like that. And, he would be the one to go to if, it's like, well, I would like to ask you some questions, Mr. Mont, about a bunch of these different siblings of yours and when they each got their devil fruits. And when these different islands joined Totland. He'd be like, let me get my notes and like come back and like you sit and talk and like go back and forth and compare notes. That'd be kind of interesting. I mean, I don't know if, side note to the side note of the tangent. We know that there is to a degree like a newspaper set up within Totland. I think they do get the World Economic Journal, but I do think there's also like this other newspaper that's like in Totland that they use as well for like news within Totland itself, along with, the little posters that they put out for like Brooke and Pedro and such in Totland. I'm thinking Mont might be the person that's like in charge of that, like Totland's like miniature version of, Morgan's is in regards to, the world with the World Economic Journal. So there might be a comparison to be made there. Also, Morgan's and, Mont probably have met. Given the fact that Morgan's is invited to the tea parties a lot of the time, probably. So, from there, we don't have too much else there with, Mont while everything is going on. With everything in the arc at the end of it. He's just more acting as like this information hub, sending stuff to and from and everything like that. We know that Stussy and Morgan's are there and they're watching from the side as like Morgan as Mont is like going through and doing all of this stuff and like updating of like, okay, so this is where this ship is, this is where Beijing's ship is, this is where the Germa are, this is where all of this stuff is. We know that he gets tricked by the Germa siblings because he gets a call in from what he believes is Charlotte Nastorte, but it's actually, I think it's Niji is like mimicking his voice. Calling in to say like, yeah, we've defeated the German kingdom and blah, 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 and we've taken their soldiers and everything. And Mont believes him because it sounds like his brother. And so that he like ignores what's going on with the Germa. And then later when the Germa show up, that allows them to then, fight and help, Luffy and the others at Cacao Island. So there's not too much where he's specifically involved. He's more just acting as like this information conduit going through. I know that he like talks to Stussy and Morgans a little bit about some of the stuff going on. And then we also find out that, he's informed about, the wedding cake and everything like that when Mama gets to it. And like Perospero, I think, tells Montdor his concerns about what's going on. And, Montdor, like, I think is just like very relieved when they find out that, okay, Mama ate the wedding cake and everything's fine and she's calming down. So there is that. But there's not too much else there. He's not happy when the Straw Hats manage to escape and everything, so that's there. Then we go into Whole Cake, which there's not Whole Cake. Now we go into Wano, which Montdor is one of the children that goes with Mama to Wano. In that regard, and we see him on the ship pretty much every time we cut back and forth to and from the ship, when it's arriving, when it's trying to go up the waterfall. He has a gun. I think he tries to fire it at King. He doesn't like it when they get knocked off the waterfall. And then when it happens again by Marco. So he's not happy about that. He expresses concern that, what's going to happen with Big Mom and everything like that. One thing I would point out is that I think the kids are under the same impression as we are, that we don't know what happens if Mama dies when it comes to the homies, because the thing they're on is literally a homie. The Big Mama Shanter is a homie. Or the Queen Mama Shanter, excuse me, is a homie. And if Big Mom died, then there is the question of, so does that mean that all of the homies die? Or do the homies stick around until like their life forces run out one way or the other? How does that work? And the question would be, and this question applies to any of the others that were on the on the ship when everything happened. They were on Big Mama Shanter because if Lin Lin does die, and that means that all the homies die, then they would be one of the first ones to realize it, because our ship stopped talking. That's not good. Along with any of the other miscellaneous homies that might be on the ship, like the chess peacekeepers or that type of a thing. And then, everybody in Totland would just be like panicking because like the giant donut on our island stopped singing. This is not good. Or whatever combination of things. So there's that. But also it's like if Mama dies and the homies don't stop working, then they would not be aware that Mama died yet. And we don't even know if they know if Mama's dead, because we don't know as an audience yet until that's been confirmed one way or the other. But I believe the last canon thing we saw of Montdor was when the Big Mama Shanter was pushed off the waterfall again by Marco. So there's that. That's pretty much it for what we have there. I did want to go over a little bit of trivia in regards to Montdor. So Montdor is actually a golden mountain in France and Catalan, and it is a type of cheese, I believe. It's like a soft French cheese or Swiss cheese made with cow's milk, which is just a reference to the fact that he's the minister of cheese and his favorite food is cheese. So, cheese. He also seems to have this appearance similar to the Scarecrow from The Wizard of Oz, which is kind of interesting there. And his birthday is actually April 23rd, also known as, so the day after mine, also is April 23rd, known as World Book Day, which I did not know off the top of my head, but that's kind of interesting there. It's like, okay, it couldn't have, well, I was going to say, well, April 22nd is already Earth Day, so, there's that too, but we could have World Book Day on Earth Day, I think. I'd much rather prefer to share my birthday with Montdor than Kuro, in all honesty, because I think Kuro's the only One Piece character that has a birthday on April 22nd, unfortunately. But yeah, so that's what I have here for Mont d'Or. Next up is either smoothie or galette. I think it's smoothie is next. And they'll talk about smoothie. So that's what I have here. I thank you for watching, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye.